Hi, and welcome to our LinkedIn Live broadcast on the release of the ISM report on business. And happy Cinco de Mayo to those of you who are celebrating today. My name is Dan Zeiger. I'm a senior writer and copy editor at Inside Supply Management, which is Institute for Supply Management's member publication. We're happy that you're joining us today as we break down the Services PMI data for April. Indigestion from tariffs and federal budget cuts continued during the month amid a contraction in imports and no relief on prices. But new orders grew at a faster rate and employment nearly returned to expansion, and that all helped the PMI increase to 51.6%. That's a decent headline number by any standard, but for ISM, as we learned at ISM's manufacturing report last week, it's critical to look under the hood at the sub-index data and trends. And so let's do that by bringing in our PMI mechanic. His name is Steve Miller. He's the chair of the ISM Services Business Survey Committee. Let's poke around the engine for a little bit, Steve. What stood out to you in April?
Boy, I expected it to be lower, Dan. I expected to see something in, at 50 or maybe even in the high 40s, 49 and a half. So my prediction, my crystal ball needs some polishing, I think. I was thinking, if anything kicked it into the 50s, it was going to be additional delays from suppliers, giving us a higher supplier delivery number, and that didn't materialize. Stronger new orders was really a very interesting continuation of our activities, and then business activity is still in expansion mode. It's just a little bit slower than where it was last month. I think what the big takeaway for me probably, Dan, is looking across at all the numbers really emphasizes that last month was a risk management month. It was increasing inventories. It was increasing imports to try and create some protection prior to tariffs going in place, or the announcements of tariffs. And what we saw this month is just the opposite. We saw a drop in imports, and we saw inventories going up, which natural outcome of doing high imports last month. And that'll probably continue for a couple of months as overseas ordering starts hitting the ground, and we'll see what kind of tariff impact there is from those as they arrive. Yeah.
Well, let's elaborate on that. You mentioned business activity and new orders. Though, when I see the table every month, those are obviously the first two numbers that I look at among the sub-indexes, which I guess makes sense because they are the first two that are listed, kind of give you an idea of what, is happening currently and also in the pipeline. Business activity growth slowed. I mean, it was still good, 53.7%. And then new orders, as you mentioned, did tick up a little bit, 1.9% to 52.3. Just break that down a little bit,
Sure.
A little bit further.
What I try to do with the commentary, Dan, is reflect what kind of majority of types of comments we're having flow through. And then the second piece is talking to the topic of the month, so that people get a sense for where our survey respondents are saying things are going. What some of the undertone in the comments, though, were that business is continuing to be strong, businesses continuing to hit targets, with some minority of comments saying weakness, government cuts are impacting our business, and that type of thing. So not insignificant for those companies that are being impacted, but the undertone of the commentary within this month's survey was business is pretty good. It's expanding where we were expecting it to expand, and it's not dropping off of a cliff, where if you read a lot in the news, you'd think, oh my gosh, tariffs are impacting everybody and killing all business, which just isn't the case.
Yeah. Let's talk about employment, which is the number 3 index there on the list. And you'd mentioned, maybe part of that risk management theme that you had mentioned last month, it kind of took a little bit of a tumble, and maybe that's a factor of companies right-sizing staffs or something. But then, it made up some of that ground this month, or in April. It gained 2.8 percentage points to almost land back in expansion again at 49%. And of course, we had the federal jobs report on Friday. The headline number was encouraging as well. Just to evaluate the landscape there.
Yeah, two things on that, Dan, that come to mind for me. One is when you're a services business, your easiest lever is employment. You lose people every month. They either go to good jobs or they retire or they leave because, not of their choice. But you can say, okay, we're not going to backfill right now. There's too much risk in the business, too much risk around tariff impacts. We don't know what they're going to be. So let's hold off before we backfill those positions. That together with some of the government cuts that were being discussed and announced in the last 2 months, I think those combined impacted the number we saw last month in March. April's number, things are starting to work their way out, less uncertainty. Go ahead and start filling those headcount. Even though it's still in contraction, it's like you said, very close to flat. So I think that just indicates people's a little bit more comfort in where things are, a little bit better understanding on what tariffs are going to impact us, which ones aren't, which ones we think are likely to resolve themselves so that we can relax a bit on the employment side.
Yeah. You were just talking about tariffs, and at least in the data that this month the services sector has shown a little bit of a resiliency in the face of them. But they still dominated the panelists' comments.
Exactly.
And we'll talk about one thing in specific. I want to ask you. My next question will be related to smaller businesses and how big of a concern that might be there. But just in general, tariffs did dominate the panelists' comments, and especially. Concerns over federal budget cuts was a dynamic that continued. Just to take the pulse of the community, the services community, and their mindset, and just give me your read on those two particular dynamics.
So the two dynamics being
tariffs and the federal budget cuts.
Okay, yeah. So on the federal budget cuts, it seemed like it was a little muted to me versus last month. Last month there was much more commentary around downsizing, reduction in business, having to take some significant cuts. So Dan, honestly, I don't know whether that is just continuing and not being commented about this month, but the jobs numbers seem to support, maybe it was more around, okay, this is going to be kind of a 12-month thing rather than a next month, here's a bunch of people that aren't going to be allowed to show up to work anymore. I don't know the inner workings there, but the commentary seemed to think, okay, maybe this isn't as severe as what we were originally thinking. On the tariffs, we're seeing expansion across other industries, saying that prices paid are flowing through at a higher number. So we saw 7 of the industries last month. Sorry, I keep saying last month. This month, I'm going to keep it to the report activity.
I do that a lot too.
March's numbers. We had 7 industries in their respondent comments saying that they're seeing impacts to their prices paid being raised due to tariffs. There were 9 of them, 9 of the 18 industries, representing about a third of the U.S. economy now, saying that they're seeing increased pricing based on tariff impacts. Now we saw 16 of them making commentary around planning is being impacted. They're being told their prices will go up, but they're going to be pushing back, that type of thing. But now we're actually seeing the prices index go up to 65, and we're seeing more commentary around actual impacts due to the tariffs.
Yeah, we'll hold that thought on the small businesses. But since we're talking about the prices index, let's just camp there a little bit more. Last month when I asked you about it, we kind of talked about it might be a minor victory if the index stays in the neighborhood of 60%. And,
yes.
Obviously in April, it went north of 65%. And I'm looking at the list of commodities up in price. And if I remember correctly, it's 19 now. Labor has been there for 53 months in a row. Steel products is there. And, some of the other aluminum products, the commodities that show up from time to time are back. But just talk about, how big of a worry is this, with that big high reading in the prices index?
Yeah. So Dan, one of the earlier conversations I had today is the old saying, I see a light at the end of the tunnel. Not sure whether it's the end of the tunnel or a train headed my way. I think that for prices paid is exactly where we're at now. I think we saw optimism in some of the commentary around we're understanding the tariffs, still a lot of activity and uncertainty around planning, but people are continuing to see some strength there. Prices are flowing through. We're seeing an increased percentage of that, which is taking us up to 65. We're not up in the 70s like they were when we saw high inflation, but we are at a number that saw inflation, or the last time we saw it, inflation rates were in the mid 5s to mid 6s, depending on which one you look at. So I think there's certainly a reason to be concerned there. We're not seeing the type of monetary policy which would enable inflation to grow the way it did back then. Mm-hmm. So if there's any takeaway for me at the Fed, I'm wondering, is it too early? Is it too early really to consider an additional rate cut? Is June really what I'm going to be doing, or I'm going to be pushing it out a little bit further till I still see how things shake out? And I think two things that'll drive that are decisions around actual tariffs and agreements with other countries. And the second one is what this is going to happen with this budget. What kind of tax cuts, what types of increased defense spending is there going to be, and what sectors of the economy are we going to hit to say, can we release some of the rates, reduce some of the rates, release or make monetary policy a little bit more liberal, or does that create just too much inflation risk with the tariffs flowing through?
Mm-hmm. Among the tariffs comments that were in this one stood out to me the most. I wanted to ask you about it. It's a comment from a respondent in agriculture, forestry, fishing, and hunting. And he or she says, tariffs are negatively impacting small business customers. Many small business customers source their products from China. They cannot afford to compete in the marketplace sourcing from other countries, and we could not move products fast enough to beat the tariff starting dates. I mean, is this something to be on the lookout for or stick a pin in? I mean, how big of a concern, could this potentially be? Obviously, small businesses are a big part of the services sector. Just kind of evaluate that situation or potential situation if it continues.
Yeah, Dan, I included that one because I think it is a big concern.
Yeah.
And hopefully what, as supply managers, as we read the commentary, our ability to say, okay, so what will that mean to us? If you're running a small business, you have literally no ability or very little ability to push back on increases resulting from tariff flow through. If you're a big buyer, you can say, hey, I'm just not taking it, or I'll move my business elsewhere. And you have the ability to influence your suppliers as to whether they pass them through to you. Now, if I'm a small supplier or a medium-sized supplier, for some of those sellers who are having their big customers say no, I'm going to be the one taking the hit. Mm-hmm. And depending on what my profit margins are, I mean, that could put me out of business if I'm a really small, very small company with close margins. So I think it's a very serious concern, given exactly what you said, the number of small businesses that we have in the services sector, and then ultimately how much of these tariffs really do flow through to increased pricing. And even if the tariffs don't flow through, and what it means is the availability of product goes down, then local prices are going to go up. It's just natural dynamics. Even if we tell those companies that they shouldn't, that isn't nice to raise prices when supply goes down. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's business.
Yeah. You had touched on it in your overview. And the imports index, was something that we definitely needed to talk about. It had a substantial percentage point change downward in April. It went down 8.3 percentage points. It was an expansion down to 44.3%. And you got a kind of a throwaway question, I thought, in the conference call earlier today, but it turned out to be really good, and we'll talk about it later about foreign movies potentially. But yeah, just talk about the imports index in general. Was that kind of to be expected? Maybe some bulk buying to get ahead of the tariffs kind of wrapped up, or just kind of give us the situation there.
That's the way I interpreted it, Dan. So we saw a spike last month. saw a spike in March, and then we saw a drop in April, and we saw inventories going up. To me, my interpretation is that there was additional import activity going on, so that the people that were able to act ahead got inventory in ahead of tariff impacts, so that they could have some breathing room while tariffs and agreements settled out. And I think that's what they're doing right now, is they're taking a breath, seeing how is this all going to materialize, and how much more ordering do I want to do. So I don't think it's going to be a long-term thing, provided that that there is some settlement around what tariffs are going to go in versus not. Now, if the whole reciprocal tariff thing starts up again, we're not able to reach settlements with our major trading partners, then we'll continue to see this in contraction. We'll see inventories coming down. We'll see probably backlog continuing to contract, and exports continuing to contract.
Yeah. Well, yeah. In a call earlier today, you got a question, and it was kind of based on the overnight social media post where the president threatened to tariff foreign-made films. I'm not quite sure how that would work, but assuming he's thought about it a little bit. But I thought your answer was really good. You kind of turned it into a whole, not only about movies, but intellectual property. And just the can of worms that could potentially open. Just talk about that a little bit, that dynamic a little bit, and just the whole IP segment and how that's a big element in the services sector, and just how that could play a big impact on imports if it were ever to come to fruition. We'll see.
Yeah, it's tough to know whether this is just a stalking horse or whether this is an important industry to start tariffing with the movie industry. To me, it's a stalking horse around other IP type expenditures, whether it's call center services or SaaS or IT development, all of the things that we're seeing a significant purchasing activity from China, from India, from the Philippines. So activities where there are large workforces that are being depended on by American companies for delivery of services in the U.S. If this is an initial step towards figuring out how to tax those from a tariff perspective, it could be a significant negative impact to services industry's profitability. Now, whether that increases our prices or how that impacts the economy overall, way too many variables for me to predict, but certainly a big watch out. And I thought it was a really intelligent question.
Yeah. I know we typically do kind of an industry spotlight, from month to month when one, shows up in the data and the report is having a particularly good month. And I think you can say that for accommodation and food services, and it's especially timely. I know you would mention this on the conference call earlier today about all the concern about, travel boycott from Canada and maybe potentially from other countries. Hasn't been felt as of yet. Accommodation and food services posted the fastest overall growth among the 18 services industries in April, as well as the best expansion in business activity, new orders, and employment. And I think if I heard you right on the conference call earlier, they got some pretty good news on prices. It wasn't as bad as, it was for a lot of other industries. So just to, break down that industry a little bit, and especially its performance in April, especially as, in relation to some of the news concerns that we cited just now.
Sure. Yeah. So two A's, the arts and entertainment actually saw prices paid go down in April, which was the only one out of 18 industries that reported a contraction in prices paid. The other 17 all said prices expanding, prices increasing. And then when you get to the accommodations and food services industry, they were the highest growth out of any of the industries in the services sector. There was some concern over travel from Canada, or lack of travel from Canada would impact business activity for accommodations and food services. It's one of the interesting dynamics that that we experienced in the restaurant industry when I was in the restaurant industry was that when grocery store prices go up, people eat out more, because the difference between the cost of what you would pay for food that you're going to make at home versus what you would pay for at a restaurant tends to be more balanced. Now, in the fast food industry, we didn't see that materialize. We saw some hits in the fast food industry. So I'm not sure how that's all balancing out, other than it isn't as bad as feared for the accommodation and food services. Maybe it's hotel stays. We don't have enough. Cruises are getting a lot of, they're getting some publicity on, it was either Bloomberg or CNBC this morning, around good value for places to go right now. And so I think that's a welcome sign of strength for us.
Yeah. Obviously, the manufacturing report last week, got some attention, and Tim Fiore, really cited the production number as a quote alarming number, and raised concerns about what that could potentially mean down the line. Obviously, as we've talked throughout the course of this broadcast, and as you gave interviews earlier today, obviously a generally positive services data. But I mean, is there anything that you can point to, even if we've talked about it before, that would be a concern, or, really a red flag that you would want us to be on the lookout for in the coming months as a potential concern?
Dan, I think it's a natural outcome of business uncertainty. You only have, and I think one of the real improvements that we've made in the supply management industry is we look much more at working capital than we used to. But we're seeing expansion in inventories, and we're seeing that number continue to increase. And we did a lot of activity from a risk management perspective for imports. Well, when you have business uncertainty and you're driving more inventory to protect yourself from tariffs, you have to look to other places to reduce the amount of capital or working capital you have deployed. I think it's a natural outcome to hold off, and we saw that as some of the commentary, to hold off in orders on the supply side. And my interpretation is that's what you're seeing in the manufacturing industry. You're seeing caution in the services industry. Let's hold off on making those additional expenditures, because we've got a lot of working capital deployed to protect ourselves on the import side. So naturally, for U.S. manufacturers, that means that there's less cash being deployed to purchase that inventory.
Well, yeah, Steve, as usual, this has been a good and informative discussion as we break down the services sector, for the month of April. Is there anything that we haven't talked about or that I haven't asked that think might be important to include before we wrap up here?
You briefly addressed it on the employment side. But one of the things that was curious for me was the BLS numbers that were stronger than expected versus last month, versus March's and April's ISM services employment numbers. And so I started looking at historical BLS for the last 18 months versus a services index. And we see about a 1 to 3 month lag time from the ISM to when it hits the BLS numbers. So the one concern or flag that I would hold out there, Dan, is that we saw, for anybody that makes decisions based on the BLS numbers, we saw really good strength in employment January, February, and we saw better than expected numbers in BLS in April. We saw weaker than expected numbers in March and April. I think it's reasonable to expect the BLS numbers will be low in June, possibly in May. So that would be the one thing that was just, looking at the numbers in detail over the last couple of days, the one that I would be kind of looking out for.
That's a great point. Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. It's always fun if you're, as I've said, if you're a student of the ISM report on business data, to see, how it can potentially work in concert with other financial data and the impact it could have even a couple or 2 or 3 months down the line, as you just cited. So yeah, thanks a lot, Steve. I appreciate it. It was a great time. Yeah. And thanks to you for joining us today. For more information, feel free to go to ismworld.org, where in a little bit you can read our roundup article that details a lot of what Steve and I just discussed. And if you want to be a part of the ISM Manufacturing Services or Hospitals Business Survey panels that help compile data for the report on business, hey, visit ismworld.org/join the panel for more information. And another reminder, I alluded to this on the manufacturing call last Thursday. On June 4th, when the next services report is released, a lot of us at ISM are going to be in transit back from Orlando, Florida, following our annual conference. So we won't have a broadcast that day, most likely. But keep an eye on ISM's LinkedIn page for an announcement on when we'll break down the May ISM report on business, the services data, as well as the manufacturing data. So for Steve Miller and some good folks who help us behind the scenes, their names are Christina Cahill and Jennifer Stevens. I'm Dan Zeiger. We'll see you next time.